just about 200 meters from here, that direction, a missile hit this morning around 7 a.m. Right now it's 11:45. So a few hours ago, I was at home, thankfully, drinking my coffee. I did hear the explosion, and when I came this morning, I was met with a large traffic jam because it hit right on the road that I usually go by every single morning, every single afternoon as I come to the church office to work and to do ministry. And I just want to have a discussion with you about that. It's been a long time. There has been a lot of missiles, a lot of drones, a lot of violence, and a lot of death here in Ukraine. How do we deal with those things? And how do we keep the gospel central? Friends, welcome to the Gospel Today podcast. I'm Caleb Suku, and I am sitting here right now in Odessa, Ukraine. I haven't talked, a lot about the missile attacks and things like that recently on this podcast. And so this is kind of an unscripted podcast today where I want to talk about some of these things. And it's kind of weighing on my mind a little bit, although we've lived in Ukraine now for over 4 years during war. And where I'm sitting right now, within maybe about a 500 meter radius, actually I don't even keep count anymore. There's been maybe, 25, 30 hits because we're kind of close to the port. The closest one was about 120 meters just on the other side of the building here. This one was pretty close this morning, it's about 200 meters away. In fact, when I got to work, I just walked down the street here. I could see the top of the apartment building. Looked like it hit the top, killed 3 people. One person looks like they were just walking down the stairs here, just on our side of the street. And so those things affect us. And what I'm thinking about this morning and kind of going over my mind is the hardening of the heart. One of the effects of living in a war-torn country, and especially for a long period of time, is that prolonged war, death, pain, violence, tends to have a very negative effect on people's hearts. It hardens it. And in a way, I've experienced this myself, and I think it's something that I try to be aware of. And that is, you know what? You can't live for a prolonged period of time and allow yourself to be so emotionally taken up with every missile strike, every death, every piece of destruction that is happening. And in some senses, that's just because as humans, we're limited in the amount of, or we have a self-preservation, I think, kind of in our nature of not allowing ourselves to experience pain. And so there are some coping mechanisms, but I think that we have to be careful as Christians living in these kinds of circumstances not to become calloused and hard-hearted, because I think that's the danger. And I think that that's what the enemy wants. And of course, we can see this in the spiritual battle as well. When you live in a context and a culture that is sinful to its core, when you see it every time you drive on billboards, every advertisement, TV shows, when it's all around you, what happens? You grow easily callous to it, and it's like this is the enemy's tactic. And I do believe that right now in Ukraine, think about this. When the full-scale invasion first started back in February 2022, I remember those first explosions very well, 5:20 in the morning. And those first explosions, your heart is beating fast, adrenaline, some kind of fear, panic. What are we going to do? Trying to stay calm. And the whole world, it seemed like, was all of a sudden the attention was on Ukraine and what's going to happen and why is Russia doing this. That was the first day. Second day, third day, fourth week, 6th month, and then years go by. And what happens? I used to actually post a lot more about different, missile hits and drone hits. I do still post about that, but it just gets overwhelming. It's too much. I don't want to post about that every single day. But when it's 200 meters from your church, then you kind of think, well, okay, it is. But, it happens, it's daily. I'm not saying 200 meters from our church daily, but the explosions, the air raids, they're daily. And so, bringing this back to our perspective and to a gospel understanding, how do we protect ourselves from becoming hard of heart? Because that's the temptation, friends, honestly. And, I'm tempted almost to get more upset over the fact that there was a traffic jam caused by this missile strike this morning that kind of made me go in circles a little bit and took me an extra 30 minutes to get to church than the fact that there was actually a missile strike. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm saying that is the temptation. So how can we think about this biblically? And the other thing is, in sharing the gospel, we often look at Ukraine as right now as very fertile ground for the gospel because God does he leads people towards himself through pain and suffering, right? He gives people an opportunity to look beyond the temporary to a solution that is spiritual and that is eternal and that changes and gives hope to the heart rather than giving hope to the political situation or the immediate physical situation that we're in. So we see Ukraine as being a fertile ground ripe for harvest spiritually. But on the other hand, we also have to admit that prolonged war also hardens hearts. And it makes people more difficult to reach. And you see questions like, what can your God do for me? Read Psalm 44. I just read it last night. And it's almost a depressing psalm if you don't understand it in the context of all the psalms. And it asks the question, where's God? Why isn't he helping? It's been 4.5 years. And I've faced that from Ukrainians from time to time where now they kind of lose hope and they become hardened. Okay, let's bring this back to some gospel truths, right? And I want to think with you primarily about Jesus. One of the things that the Gospels, and not only the Gospels, present us very clearly with is that Jesus was familiar with pain, with suffering, and with grief. And we can see that in the prophet Isaiah, when he writes about the coming Messiah in Isaiah 53, verse 3, and he says, he was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. So, it is encouraging to me in a way to know that Jesus does not shy away from entering into the suffering of humanity. This is one of the great challenges that we have, looking out over humanity and realizing there is great suffering and we cannot stop it. We can help in some small ways, but overall, whether it is the war in Ukraine that is causing millions to be displaced, the women on the front lines losing their lives and limbs, or it is in some other country where people are dying of hunger or being persecuted. This world is full of suffering. And Jesus neither backs away from that or ignores it or tries to hide from it in any way. He walks straight into it. And that is unique and amazing, that this God and Savior that loves me, he has walked through far greater suffering than I could ever know. I think another example of that Jesus isn't just looking down apathetically or thinking, well, I guess they deserved it or something like that. I think another example is John 11:33, when Jesus comes to the funeral for his friend Lazarus. And in John 11:33, it says, when Jesus saw her weeping, it was Lazarus' sister, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And the verb there is really a powerful one that tells us that there was deep emotions, powerful emotions. And Jesus was willing to go to be with them, to walk through that with them. What an important example that is for us. We can read this, I think, probably about 7 or 8 times in the Gospels, where it says that Jesus looked on the crowds and he had compassion on them. So Jesus felt very deeply for people, and he was, walked along with them through their grief, their pain, which is an example to us, but also an encouragement to us that when we feel these things, Jesus understands. He knows. He's been there, and he's walked through it as well. But there's another interesting verb that is connected with some of this feeling. And to me, this is also encouraging, because I can tell you that I have felt this as well. And that is in Mark chapter 1, verses 40 and 41. It says this: a man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, make me clean." Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched him. "I'm willing," he said, "be clean." That's a very interesting description of Jesus' feelings. And it seems to indicate that he wasn't just that, "Oh, I feel bad for you. Oh, it's so sad." But that he was upset. And most likely, it seems that this upset and angered feeling came from how he saw other people mistreating this man with leprosy. And why I say that's encouraging is because when you see the mistreatment, and in my case particular, the mistreatment of Ukrainians by the Russians, there is an indignant feeling. There is a feeling of a powerful emotion and anger. And I don't think that we should have a Christianity that, if it's a biblical Christianity, it has to include this idea of feeling indignant, understanding that there is mistreatment going on, that that person didn't deserve that, and that whoever did it was acting in sin, they were acting selfishly, they were taking advantage of someone else. And so if you have felt indignant or angered by the mistreatment of others, then you have felt what Jesus felt when he saw this man with leprosy. And so you don't need to apologize for that, although we do need to be careful how we direct that. And that is the next thing that I do want to share with you, and that is that Jesus did not dwell in these things. He didn't allow himself to just marinate in sorrow, in grief, in indignation. He had times, and we can see this in the Gospels, there were, I don't remember the exact number, 4 or 5 times when he got away. He went early in the morning to pray. He prayed late at night. He spent time on his own. That's really important, especially when you are living in a situation where there is constant or nearly constant trauma going on. We have to find those times to get away, even if not physically, and sometimes helpful physically to get away, but spiritually to have a retreat where we can spend time with God in His Word, in prayer, and in worship. And I have personally found the book of Psalms extremely helpful in this. And there's all kinds of different trauma manuals and trainings on how to. I just think that almost nothing is better than just reading and contemplating and meditating on the Psalms, because you will find a voice in the Psalms that understands you, that has gone through that pain, and then you will be directed towards God. So, extremely powerful. But Jesus did not stay in that grief. He did not marinate in it. He moved forward. And in fact, in the Gospel of John, chapter 17, Jesus prays for his disciples and he prays for all believers that will come after him. What does he pray for? That they would have the joy that he has. Jesus was a man of joy. And so we see that contrast. He had grief and sorrow and pain, and yet he had joy at the same time. And that is the amazing miracle and tension of being with Christ here on earth, where we see and experience pain and grief, and yet at the same time we have this deep heart joy knowing that Christ is victor. And so in John chapter 17, Jesus prays for his disciples, and he says in verse 13, I am coming to you now, but I say these things while I am still in the world, so that they may have the full measure of my joy within them. And that's an encouragement for us all. Whatever grief and pain we go through, it does not have the power to take away true Christian joy. So these are gospel truths that we need to contemplate and keep in our framework, especially when we are going through traumatic times, times of violence, times of suffering. And also, I think it's really vitally important part of our Christian witness and testimony. Because as the world goes through trying, difficult, painful, violent times, they're also looking for an answer. And many of them have become hardened of heart. And if we can come alongside them like Jesus did, like he came to the sisters, Mary and Martha of Lazarus, and walked with them and felt with them, if we can do that and then point them to a hope beyond, I think that's just a really powerful thing. So, friends, those are some of my thoughts about dealing with violence, with war, death. It's the context that we live in here. And I don't want you to think that we're constantly just living in constant fear and in constant pain and suffering. It is a balancing act. And pray for us. Pray that God would give us the biblical wisdom and insight to be able to keep the gospel centered, keep our hearts and minds centered on the gospel, be able to walk in the pain with Ukrainians, but not to wallow in it, to have joy. And we appreciate your prayers for us. We appreciate your prayer support, your financial support. If you would like to know more about our ministry, I want to welcome you to our website, Gospel Today Online. where you can sign up for our newsletter. And we appreciate also your financial support that allows us to continue to do the work of sharing the gospel and enabling churches to effectively and biblically share the gospel and engage in biblical discipleship here in Ukraine.